The Supreme Court just dropped a 5-4 emergency decision that caught the entire nation off guard. There was no public hearing, no lengthy legal briefs, no back and forth arguments in front of the justices. Just a swift, decisive move from the highest court in the land that immediately turned a massive national controversy completely upside down. Legal professionals, government leaders at the state level, and federal departments across the country found themselves caught completely unprepared because this wasn't some routine procedural matter. This was the type of decision that fundamentally changes everything in an instant, forcing everyone involved to ask themselves one urgent question: where do we go from here? And honestly, the answer to that question might end up redefining the limits of constitutional power for decades to come. Before we get into the details, I need you to do something really quick. Smash that like button right now if you care about protecting your Second Amendment rights. It only takes a second, and it makes a huge difference in getting this information out to more people who need it. Also, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any future updates on your rights. Trust me, you're going to want to stay informed about this stuff. 5 of the justices reached a consensus that things had gotten out of control in the lower courts, moving too quickly in a dangerous direction, and that the Supreme Court had an obligation to intervene right away. But 4 other justices pushed back hard, issuing their objections immediately and cautioning that the court was breaking from its usual procedures, inserting itself into an ongoing heated conflict and creating a dangerous template that could affect every future clash between state governments and federal authority. Their concerns didn't matter in the end, though. The 5-justice majority carried the day. And the second that decision went public, the entire legal environment across America transformed overnight. What made this situation even more dramatic was the nature of the case itself. This wasn't just another technical legal dispute over procedure or interpretation. At its heart, this case dealt with fundamental questions about how much power states actually have, how far federal authority can reach, what the Constitution requires from both sides, and whether individual states have the right to act independently when they believe the federal government is dropping the ball on its responsibilities. For several months leading up to this moment, lower courts had been locked in intense legal battles over these exact issues. Judges were issuing temporary orders left and right, blocking one another's rulings and debating which court even had the authority to make these calls. And during all of that legal back and forth, states weren't just sitting around waiting. They were taking action based on the rulings they had won, putting new policies into place, creating enforcement mechanisms, and establishing what they saw as necessary protective measures. But the instant the Supreme Court released its emergency order, all of that came to a screeching halt. Everything those states had been depending on was suddenly frozen. The practical effect of the emergency order was that it essentially canceled out an injunction that had been issued by a lower court, which meant federal agencies suddenly got back certain powers they had temporarily lost. States that thought they were winning important legal battles found themselves watching those victories disappear. The protections they thought were locked in place were suddenly stripped away. Governors who had been aggressively pushing their legal positions for weeks were forced to go back to square one and completely rethink their approach. And regular people across the country, already exhausted from constant national tensions, were left trying to make sense of how something this important could flip so dramatically and so fast, all because of a single emergency order from the Supreme Court. From the perspective of the 5 justices who made up the majority, their reasoning was straightforward. They felt that the lower courts had gone too far beyond their authority. The justices took the position that emergency circumstances demanded immediate action, and that allowing months to pass while waiting for a standard appeal process could result in serious harm. But the 4 justices who disagreed saw things very differently. They argued forcefully that the majority was treating emergency powers far too lightly, skipping over established processes and potentially damaging the overall stability of how the judicial system is supposed to function. They raised concerns that this kind of rapid intervention, especially on such a politically charged and divisive topic, would lead to increased political influence on the court, more rushed decisions, and greater overall confusion in the legal system. But regardless of whether the dissenting opinion makes sense to you or not, The bottom line is simple. The order is active right now, and states across the country are already reacting to it. Some state governors have declared their intention to keep pushing forward with their policies no matter what pressure comes from the federal government, arguing that they're acting in constitutional self-defense. Other state leaders are taking the position that the Supreme Court's order proves that federal power takes priority. At the same time, the federal government isn't wasting any time. It's moving aggressively to reclaim and exercise the authorities it regained through this ruling, instructing agencies to restart operations that had been shut down or limited just a few days before. This abrupt reversal has triggered an avalanche of new legal filings. Attorneys are submitting emergency motions at breakneck speed, either trying to protect state powers or trying to push back against the federal government's renewed authority. Some legal analysts think the Supreme Court's order is opening the door to a massive constitutional confrontation that could dwarf anything we've seen recently. Others believe the court is pushing the limits of what's known as its emergency docket, which critics often call the shadow docket, a process they say gives the court way too much influence to change major policies without proper transparency or public scrutiny. But here's what everyone can agree on. The fact that the majority acted this quickly shows that this battle is nowhere near finished. And while the court is officially describing this as just a temporary measure, something meant to freeze the situation until more complete legal arguments can be presented, the real-world impact is already massive. The emergency order has completely reset the legal battlefield. It's changing how states are conducting themselves. It's altering how federal agencies are carrying out their duties. And it's challenging the assumptions that legal scholars had made about how willing the Supreme Court is to use emergency powers in high-stakes situations. But perhaps most significantly, it's giving us a preview of how the court might ultimately decide when this case gets fully argued. If the majority felt confident enough to step in at this stage, it strongly suggests their final ruling might go in that same direction. What makes this whole situation even more volatile is that the states involved in this case insist they're acting out of pure necessity. They're claiming the federal government has completely failed to meet its constitutional responsibilities. Their argument is that federal agencies aren't delivering the protection or enforcement that's required by federal law, which has left states with no choice but to step up and protect their own people. These arguments have actually been gaining some support in certain courts, with some judges agreeing that states do have a legitimate right to take protective measures when the federal government isn't doing its job. But the Supreme Court's emergency order suggests that the majority of justices might not be buying those arguments. This is building toward a truly historic clash between the concept of state sovereignty and the principle of federal supremacy. And depending on how the court ultimately rules in its final decision, the implications could reach far beyond just this one case. It could establish new limits on how far states are allowed to go when claiming they need to defend themselves. It could create new definitions of when the federal government holds exclusive power. It could completely change how courts handle emergency situations going forward. It could even influence how future presidents use their executive powers. This emergency order isn't bringing the conflict to a close. If anything, it's speeding everything up. It's forcing everyone involved to regroup, come up with new strategies, and get ready for whatever comes next. States that believe they had the upper hand now need to completely rebuild their legal cases. Federal agencies have to justify every action they're taking under the authorities they just got back. And the Supreme Court, now deeply involved in this fight, needs to prepare itself for a flood of new legal filings, more emergency requests, and demands for additional clarification. Behind the scenes right now, multiple states are busy writing new legal arguments in preparation for the next stage of this battle. In legal circles, experts are carefully examining every single word in the court's brief order, trying to find hidden clues and make predictions about what the final Supreme Court ruling will look like. Meanwhile, public reaction is intensifying rapidly. People who support state rights are accusing the court of taking the federal government's side too hastily. People who support federal authority are arguing the court stopped states from overstepping their boundaries. And millions of Americans following this story online are asking themselves why the Supreme Court keeps making these enormous national decisions through emergency orders rather than through full, detailed opinions that everyone can read and understand. This debate is only going to get more heated as additional emergency cases make their way to the court. And right now, with this 5-4 split among the justices, it's obvious that even the court itself is deeply divided on the question of how far emergency intervention should be allowed to go. But the reality is that the Supreme Court took this action because it understands just how high the stakes really are. By issuing this emergency order, the court has effectively seized control of the entire timeline. It's sending a clear message that lower courts can't move forward too aggressively without supervision from above, especially in cases that involve core constitutional questions about who holds power. And now the whole nation is waiting to see what happens in the next phase. The full court hearings, the oral arguments in front of all the justices, and the final decision that has the potential to completely transform national policy. Because what's coming isn't just another legal ruling. It's a decision that could fundamentally shift the balance between federal power and state power for generations into the future. And for a lot of legal experts watching this unfold, this emergency order wasn't simply a response to an ongoing dispute. It was a signal, a preview of things to come, an indication that the Supreme Court is getting ready to redefine the boundaries of governmental authority in ways that will be felt in every single state across the entire country. That's exactly why this 5-4 emergency order sent shockwaves from coast to coast. And that's why whatever comes next has the potential to genuinely change everything. If you found this information valuable, do me a favor and hit that like button right now. It helps get this critical information in front of more gun owners who need to know about these changes. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on your rights. Share this video with every gun owner you know because this information is too important to keep to yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.